Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining. This is going to be a fun one. Well, we're about to blow the lid up, but open on some really interesting stuff in terms of the MAHA movement, which is a very, very, very popular movement in America right now. I have to say, and Steve and I have talked about this before, but I have a number of friends, including family members, who are diehard MAHA. They really believe that a lot of the things that RFK Jr. and Calley Means have been saying about the food industry and vaccines are legitimate. And some of it is, specifically on the food industry. I lived in Europe for a few years, and I definitely noticed that when you live in a place where there are more regulations for your food, you are healthier. It's not a proven thing, but you can it's just a feeling. The fruit isn't as beautiful, but it's not, it doesn't have any pesticides. That the skincare has 200 products that can't go in it. It's regulated. Here in America, we have barely anything compared to that. Even when they tried to do a TTIP deal with Obama, a transatlantic partnership deal back in 2014, the Europeans didn't want to do it because they don't like that we actually chlorinate our chicken. They think that we have too many hormones in our beef. So there's a lot to it that makes the MAHA movement compelling. There are a lot of questions about what causes autism. And so there are a lot of questions about what causes a lot of disease, right? And I think the questions are where people come in and they try to fill in the answers, and some of them do it dishonestly. And that's sort of the direction of this show, because Steve has firsthand knowledge about Calley Means and who he is. And, I first learned about him through friends, through my aunt, who's a nurse practitioner, told me. She was like, no, go read Calley Means' book. And she and a lot of the nurses in her hospital, is top hospital in North Carolina and Charlotte, they're all big believers in him. And she's like, he was a lobbyist. He works for Coca-Cola. You got to read it. Don't listen to anyone. Tara, trust me. And she's a smart woman. I have other friends too that, they're worried about their children. They're like, why are we giving them red dyes? Why are the Fruit Loops in Canada not as bright? Why is it different when you go to another country when it comes to food? But then there are the fallacies that are filled in the middle, and the people who are spreading some of these things, they have they make money from it. You know what I mean? That they make money from a lot of the falsehoods that they spread, or the theories that they spread that don't have any backing, scientific backing. And so this is all to say, and I'm laying this groundwork to say that, like, we're not saying that we should not be regulating food. We are not saying that food products, everything that you ingest, should not come with regulations, but we have to be careful about the messengers and their agendas. And so Steve, so Vanity Fair comes out with this huge piece. It's an expose on Calley Means, Catherine Ibban. I don't know her personally, but I've heard that she's a good reporter. And she's been working on this for a long time. And I'm just going to read you the quote from the top of the piece. The dizzying rise of MAHA warrior Calley Means, RFK Jr.'s right-hand man. And one of the primary architects of the Make America Healthy Again takeover of the federal health apparatus, Means has risen to power in part on the strength of his personal narrative. He was a big food and big pharma lobbyist who saw the light. And yet a 6-month Vanity Fair investigation raises questions about whether Means has embellished his personal story. And this is where Steve comes in, saying, Calley Means is not a whistleblower. He's an opportunist peddling junk science to make millions. So Steve, I think this is a good place for you to jump in there and explain to our listeners, what did you mean by that?
Well, Calley Means was never a lobbyist, ever. And he never worked for Coca-Cola. And the reason I know that is because Calley Means was my assistant. And I first met Calley Means on the McCain campaign. And Calley Means was an ambitious young guy. There's lots of people like that on a political campaign. And over the course of the summer and the fall, Calley would pick me up, drive me around in Crystal City, Virginia. And when the campaign was over, I brought him back. I hired him to be my assistant at Mercury Public Affairs, and I was the founding partner of Mercury California. And at Mercury Public Affairs, he was in charge of my logistics. I was traveling 350,000 miles a year globally, and he did my expenses. He did not lobby. Mercury did not lobby. Mercury never represented Coca-Cola or Pepsi, and in fact represented clients on the opposite sides of where those companies were. I left Mercury and I joined Edelman, the global public relations firm, and I was the vice chairman at Edelman, and I got Calley a job at Edelman, and I curated Calley's acceptance process to Harvard Business School personally.
Wow.
Made sure he had the right letters of recommendation. One of my clients was Dr. Michael Porter, who's one of the foremost business professors in the United States. And there was a project that we was working on the Harvard Business School is involved in. Richard Edelman, who is the CEO of the company. And I said to Richard, Calley is a smart, capable young guy, wants to go to Harvard Business School. Richard was an alumni of Harvard Business School. And so at any rate, Calley did everything I could to curate Calley's admission into Harvard Business School. Calley goes to Harvard Business School, like not alone in this. He meets the woman he loves there, gets married. She is a plant manager. At the time, if I recall the story correctly, she was running an Apple plant and was the youngest plant manager ever to run one of these factories, an American in Asia. And what they figured out together, and it was kind of genius, is that there's this one town, this is after Harvard Business School in China, that where 98% of all the world's wedding dresses are made. And if, it doesn't matter, right? Your $25,000 wedding dress, your $300,000 wedding dress, your $300 wedding dress, they're all made in the same place. And Calley,
it's like eyeglasses in that town in Italy. It's so crazy.
One town makes all the wedding dresses, and he came up with this idea that you could basically have a customized wedding dress made, curated, and he sold that business. But Calley was never a lobbyist, and Edelman, the global PR firm, their client was Pepsi, not Coca-Cola. So just as a matter of the space-time continuum, from the end of the McCain campaign through today, Calley Means just did none of the things that he said he did. And yet, the New York Times last week and other news organizations on a constant basis introduced Calley Means as having done these things, and he is as big a fabulous with regard to having done those things as Elizabeth Holmes or Sam Bankman-Fried or George Santos. And so we sit here and we scratch our heads in a society and in the media. How is it, right, that this report is just released, public health report, lives of the American people at stake by MAHA, the great MAHA report. And it turns out, right, that it's written by an AI. There's made up citations, made up medical reports, junk science all over it. Well, and it turns out that the guy who spearheaded the effort was my assistant, who used to do a bad job with my expenses. And I promise you, right, if you care about these issues, I care about these issues. I think that it's important to remember that the FDA created a highly permissive environment for a company to wipe out 1 million American lives with opioids in corrupt deals, right? So there's a lot of corruption, but the point is, there's the guy that has become a real zealot, intimidating reporters, shouting down people, has no credentials whatsoever, and his sister is the is the Surgeon General nominee now. And what they are is wellness influencers. She did not finish her residency. She rang the bell. She quit, right? She didn't measure up. I don't know what to say. She didn't finish the program. And so it should be disqualifying for a young physician who didn't complete their residency to be Surgeon General. But at any rate, they have a sprawling wellness business empire. Calley has no credentials whatsoever, and he is conflicted from a business perspective 100 different ways to Sunday, and he's making these policies sitting there in the White House as a special government employee and as Robert Kennedy's top advisor, and all of it is nonsense. And people who have entertained Calley, who've had him on, Megyn Kelly, looks at Joe Scarborough and criticizes him for coverage on Joe Biden. Well, Megyn Kelly has celebrated Calley Means, and I'm here to tell you, just as a matter of fact under the sun, because I know, because he was my assistant, that he has no credentials whatsoever, and he made up this entire story.
And
we didn't do any of that type of work.
Yeah. That's exactly what I want to talk about with you, Steve. Like, not only I read in this piece did he completely mess up your expenses, so it sounds like he really just did. There's an anecdote in which Steve is trying to get a Starbucks coffee and his credit card is denied because his assistant at the time, Calley Means, is alleged healthcare lobbyist at the time at Mercury, which was not lobbying for a beverage company at the time, right? That he wasn't filing your expenses. But like, let's really talk about what you were working on the time, what he was doing, how if in any way he could conflate this or confabulate this. Like, how could he have just completely, pulled this out of thin air? I mean, I know that at Edelman, you did work for Pepsi, so that meant that it would be a conflict of interest to work for Coke. But at Edelman, like, what kind of meetings could he have even had access to as an assistant?
Well, he wasn't an assistant at Edelman, whatever title he had, but he was a young guy in his 20s. He was working on research projects, making decks, and on any one of a number of different things he was working on. So, for example, that Harvard competitive project with Michael Porter, who's a towering intellect. Calley was intellectually engaged. He's a very smart guy. He was doing complicated research projects for companies that people would say, hey, that, whether it's in, whatever space. General Electric was a big client of mine, but Calley didn't work on it. But whatever projects he worked on, the one that was most significant was this competitive project with Harvard Business School. He was absolutely not involved in brokering financial transactions that were corrupt acts between Coca-Cola or Pepsi or any company and the NAACP. Calley Means has invented this story like he's Jeffrey Wigan, the tobacco whistleblower of 60 Minutes fame. And this reads almost like a movie script of his own invention, that he saw the light after all these corrupt deals, and it never happened. At Mercury, I did projects when I was doing that type of work. I was the lead strategist for the San Francisco 49ers and the construction of their stadium as they exited San Francisco. A lot of politics. I was the chief strategist for a coalition of companies for Blu-ray DVD and the format war versus HD DVD. I represented the studios in the writer's strike. I represented Indian tribes in the gaming compacts. I did not represent any of the interests that he is talking about, and specifically, Edelman has a no lobbying policy. Edelman is an independent family business. Richard Edelman is the CEO and chairman. Dan Edelman was the founder of the company. Edelman does not lobby, and has not lobbied. Though Richard today is a registered lobbyist, but that's a different story and a different requirement from work that he does.
And to be a lobbyist, just to be clear to everyone here, if you are a registered lobbyist, you have to file. You have to report. Right. It is a public document if you are a lobbyist. And are there any documents that show that Calley Means was ever a registered lobbyist?
None whatsoever. But
so that's a huge hole in the story.
He's no more a registered lobbyist than I'm a tree. Right?
Do I look like one today, though?
You look like a bush.
Yeah, exactly. I wore my camo.
George Bush got that question once. He was asked on the campaign trail, if you were a tree, what type of tree would you be? And he looked back at the reporter and he said, I'm a bush. which I thought was pretty quick-witted and fun.
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh man.
No, but he was never a lobbyist, and he never did any of that type of work, right, at Edelman or at Mercury. And I can account for every minute of his employment between the John McCain campaign and his exit to Harvard Business School, which I helped him get into. His father came up to me at a campfire outside the Ritz-Carlton Resort in Half Moon Bay, which is another thing. Calley grew up with a lot of affluence, and his father said to me, "You're the most important figure in Calley's life. You made him a man." Right? Calley worked for me for years. I stewarded Calley's career. Right? Calley was a very awkward 23-year-old. And taught him how to pay attention to detail and function in society, basically. His first 3 months at work, he gave everybody a Snuggie, right? This type of blanket, right? That I guess was the gift of the year. It was not appropriate for the workplace. And he was just this kind of awkward, really smart Stanford kid trying to feel his way. And, it's interesting when you hear him talk about all of Robert. Yeah. When he says Robert Kennedy, he makes these pronouncements, the most important cabinet secretary in history, more important than George Marshall. Right. It's like, come on. And it's so you see this guy, the rhetoric that he employs and the hyperbole he routinely engages in. And it's all nonsense. It's all a con. It's all made up. And it's very, very discouraging for a lot of people who knew this guy, who have all sorts of different opinions and all sorts of different issues. We have people that we worked with, back in those years who have special needs kids that struggle with obesity themselves. That whatever the issue is, right? There's a broad sympathy, as what you said at the beginning, for right. There's the food in the country's messed up. Right. There's really a lot of corruption in all of this, and it's a disaster. But this guy selling snake oil and saying that he did these things when in fact he was given a lot of opportunities, and now he's taken those opportunities and twisted them into something villainous, which is completely imaginary, and made up this story to make millions of dollars, and it's appalling. Paul.
Yeah. I mean, do you ever regret how you helped him?
Well, I have another guy, right, who is at the same time as was an assistant, and this guy goes to law school and joins the Navy and becomes the #1 defense attorney in the Pacific Fleet, and then he decides, well, I hear a different calling, and he becomes a priest, and he goes to the Pope's seminary in Vatican, and he's going to be a chaplain right back on active duties at a parish in San Diego, deploying with the Marines. So, I'm not his dad, right? He's not family, right? He was a guy who worked for me, afforded opportunities. But it's extraordinary to watch the delusion of somebody who's made up this story and gotten deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it without a seeming care in the world that the people that know the truth about it at some point, who are all involved in politics at some level.
Pretty brazen. It's really brazen.
And particularly me, right, is not going to call it out. And to me, what's so offensive about him in this moment is when you talk about this issue at the core and obesity, and you can look at all the crazy things he has said about it, this is fundamentally an issue related to poverty in America. This is a socioeconomic issue, right? If you live in Marin, you have a lot of good food choices, right? If you grew up in the places that Calley Means grew up in, right? If you have your own shaman, right? You're in a sweat lodge with Robert Kennedy having visions about bringing Robert Kennedy and Donald Trump together and all this. Good for you.
Yeah. You're right. Right. You're right. They're not using those skin products that have all this shit in it. They're not eating the chicken with all the hormones from Tyson's. They're not eating, they're eating their farm fresh chickens from their backyard that their chefs are cooking, and they're living their organic high life. And you're right. And claiming that they're fighting for the rest of the country so that they can be healthier. And I, again, believe in the regulation of food, big pharma. They're stopping a lot of this. It is insane. It's like the military industrial complex, how powerful it is in DC. And it needs to be challenged. But are these the right people to be challenging it? It's just they're selling their supplements, they're selling their products, they're selling their stories. And some of them are dangerous, especially the anti-vax stories, without having any science behind them. And then you hear about people believing that they can cure their cancer without getting treatments. There needs to be, we can't ignore the science either. I think it's healthy to question science. I think it's healthy to question where money is coming from. Who's paying for what. I think the root of what they were trying to do resonates with people because they feel it. They feel that there is something off, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't resonate. But so when you think about the decision to go to the moon, right, as a country, we're gonna fly a rocket, right, a space capsule to the moon, and so getting to the moon, right, is as that capsule physically arriving at the moon, right? That's an aeronautical engineering challenge. And then that capsule separates and there's a landing craft, and that thing's got to touch down on the moon. And that's a piloting challenge. The decision about whether to go to the moon, that's politics, right? And so when we think about science and we think about the pandemic, there was assertions of science as fact that may have been correct, may not have been correct. But at the end of the day, a scientist saying, well, this is what the science says, is not the same thing as what the politics says. Because there were a lot of people in the country who didn't comprehend why they couldn't walk on that trail in the woods or on the beach or in the park, right? That was a political decision, right? That was wrapped up. Well, the scientist or the doctor or the public health expert said that. And when you say enough of that, and it doesn't make sense because the person is told, well, hey, I'm out here in this fucking park at 7 a.m. with my dog, and I'm not within a quarter mile of another person. Why am I being chased out of the park here? Oh, because there's been some pronouncement from some public health official. And so... yeah, did it make sense?
Right, so the choices and the lanes and everything got scrambled, and there has been a revolution against science and against these agencies that's been stoked by demagogues. Yeah. And let's face it, right? I think one of the most powerful political shows that has been made in the 21st century that explains Donald Trump is Danny Strong's Dope Sick with Michael Keaton, that tells the story of the opioid crisis through the prism of Appalachia in this Virginia town.
I started watching that, yeah.
It's a stop. We didn't talk about any of this stuff in the country until 2016.
Yeah.
1 million people died. 1 million people died. And the FDA said, hey, this stuff was good. It wasn't addicting. And the person who said it at the FDA worked for the company, right?
Yeah.
And then went to the FDA and back and forth. And it's all corrupt.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing, when you think about the journalism of this, independent journalism, the muckrackers in the early 20th century, Upton Sinclair, books like The Jungle, they were all about the food supply.
That's exactly what they went for, because it's about the people.
Right.
It's about the poorest people. It was when the robber barons were controlling the country, the Rockefellers, the oil barons, and the people, the minority, a lot of them coming from, actually our people, a lot of them coming from Europe at that time, living in the tenements, living in the slums. And it was at the time when there was a real progressive revolution, and it was through journalism, often yellow journalism. It was Pulitzer, Joseph Pulitzer, and what he was doing at the time. And these journalists were going undercover, and they were exposing these atrocities, like in the asylums, like Nellie Bly, and then in the meatpacking. So it's like the root of the exploration is important, right? But like, we need to make sure that the people that are the messengers are not, grifting from this, are not and Steve, I think the thing that shocks me is, like, how did the New York Times not get this when they just published a post on Calley Means?
It is one of the things that I talk about all the time. I've written about it hundreds of times.
Yeah.
We don't have Donald Trump without a lot of corruption in our political system. And one of the foremost areas of corruption is access media, right? And what access media is the transaction, right, that occurs when that reporter does a profile on Calley Means for the purposes of achieving access to the things that Calley Means can help that person easily access in their reporting. And so what Calley Means is doing needs to be confronted, not coddled, and not explained on Calley's terms, because what's happening at HHS and in the Trump budget is the decimation of research across a dozen areas, hundreds of diseases impacted. And so if you think about the climb of human knowledge, to me, what really, like, kind of almost had an emotional impact was pondering. It was really, like, deep out in the woods, right, looking up at the sky, thinking about the Webb telescope, that our country made it, and it's the most complex scientific instrument ever built. And it can literally see back to the origins of the universe, to the beginning of time. And it's a thing of wonder and marvel, right? I think of that Paul Simon song, right? We live in an age of miracle and wonder.
Yeah.
Right. And so this upward trajectory, but in 150 days, right? Whatever that trajectory is, it's reached its apogee and it's falling back, or it's coming over the parabola, right? The disease that was on a track to be cured is no longer on a track to be cured because of the vandalism, the arson, the insanity, the nihilism, and the guy who's a principal agent of it, incredibly, was my assistant, but his whole origin story that's given him the license to do this stuff is a fabrication.
Yeah. Steve, that is like a lot to swallow. Also, as I've been sick for a week, wondering if I have the second strain of COVID and I'm about to go out. No, seriously, because it's back, and I'm about to go back out today and get a test. But this is it's frightening. You don't mess with health. I mean, it impacts everybody. And you know what? It impacts the rich people too eventually. And that's eventually, but it's usually, it starts from the bottom, and it starts with the bottom, and it's a sad fact. I mean, these things that they want to reform and change, they can be done. They don't need to be smashed apart with a sledgehammer. They can be explored. We can have scientists debating things. We can go back into research. We can talk, like, frankly, we should be talking about regulation and but I haven't really seen any of that from them either. The stuff that I was like almost hoping you would see. It's not like you're seeing that right away. You're not seeing the kind of progress that could be made. I think that there was something with the dyes. They definitely, have banned red dye. And that's probably a good thing. I mean, if it's banned in other countries, there's no reason that we should have it, in our country. But, I think it's a lot of destruction that's really hard to reverse. And then when you lose these scientists, these doctors, these dedicated professionals that frankly could be making a lot of money elsewhere. They don't need to work in government. I mean, they're highly qualified people. How do you get that back? How do you attract talent back?
Watching Calley Means become a world-class Twitter bully, tormenting some of the world's leading research scientists, right? And alleging conspiracies. And, the common theme is to accuse everybody of being on the take of this insidious industry. And the reality is Robert Kennedy is ethically compromised, and he serves, the most ethically compromised administration, right? That there's ever been, right? It's astonishing. And so at any rate, it's a free country, right? And there is an intolerance, right, in the politics. I mean, if you want to go live in the woods and not vaccinate yourselves, right? Good for you. And I mean it, right? With no condescension, right? But if you want to access the public school, right, you can't have epidemics breaking out on cured diseases that were thought extinct, right? Because of insanity of a mob that's trying to impose their nihilism as public health policy on the sane population. And so the people that are doing this, and are doing it for profit. And Robert Kennedy has a lot of ethical issues with regard to all of this. And the reality is that you're going to have, as a political issue, how do we fix and how do we restore America as a foremost leading nation scientifically? I mean, the European Union, as you know, is giving away enormous incentives now at cash to lure American scientists. There's going to be an enormous immigration incentive structure, to get the American entrepreneur, to get the American scientist, to get the American researcher into European labs, into Canadian labs, into labs where none of this insanity exists right now.
Yeah. Steve, I'm not really feeling that well. I don't know if anyone can tell from my eyes. My dog's having a meltdown. But this was really, really enlightening. I'd love to pick this up again, but
Absolutely.
First of all, thank you for your bravery, because I read that article and there are a lot of people that were on background. I understand for a lot of reasons why people don't go on the record. I think there were about 9 people on background in that article who had worked with Calley at some point. You were on the record, and I think one other person. I believe there was one other person. So I'm sure you're going to get heat for that. So, as a journalist, we need our sources to come out and speak, because often if you don't have someone willing to go on the record, a story like that dies. And you never know about it. So thank you to the real whistleblowers, really. And appreciate that.
Well, feel better, Tara. And it's always good to be with you.
Yeah,
and, again, everyone who joined us, whatever you think about the issue, you should be guided by a person who at least did the things they said they did as part of their credential to tell you about the things that you should be doing with your health. That the last person you ever want to be listening to is a person who made up all their credentials while they're simultaneously telling you how you ought to live your life and how you ought to live your life with regard to your health care and what to put in your mouth and who's doing what to you. And so the fraudulence is important to see. And we live in an age of real dishonesty. And so it was my pleasure to speak out on the record and call it out. But Tara, feel better?
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. And thanks to everyone who said feel better. Very kind of you. And of course, you can support both of our journalism. You can support Steve at the at the Warning, excuse me, and you can support me at the Red Letter by becoming subscribers. We appreciate your time and that you tuned in for this incredible story.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tara Palmeri Show. If you like this show, please follow it, share it with your friends, comment, like, subscribe. If you like my reporting, go to tarapalmeri.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter, The Red Letter, where you can get all my exclusive reporting straight to your inbox. It's a way to support my independent journalism. I want to thank my producers, Eric Ebenate and Jane Fusco. I'll see you again soon.